Put down that camera and strap in. It's time for a new episode of TogChat Live. Get ready for 60 minutes of wall-to-wall photography, including photo news, tips, and your photography questions in real time, with answers from your host, Olympus visionary Joe Edelman.
Hey gang, that's me. How's everybody doing tonight? Thank you for joining me for another live episode of TogChat. As always, I'm your host, Joe Edelman, and my mission, to help photographers like you to develop a more solid understanding of the hows and whys behind making great photographs. So as always, gang, do me a solid. Before we get going, please take a moment, tell your photography friends that we are streaming live on YouTube right now. You know, Facebook, Twitter, those are the fastest ways to get the word out. Or you can click that share button right below the video. That'll get you started. And I will also give you the link in the chat window here. Remember, it is tog.chat/live. So you can go ahead and use either one of those. Already, we've got a lot of people in here. Jean Edwards here from the Netherlands. Nick is here from Maryland. I've got Lynn from New York. I got John in England. Martin in Montreal. It is so cool. There are people here from all over the world. So please check in, say hi, let us know where you're watching from. It's always neat to see where people are tuning in from. And start posting your questions. I have an awesome guest tonight. Our topic, something that I don't normally talk about, that's travel photography. And I picked this guest because I love her work. It is not your traditional kind of boring postcard kind of travel photography. This work is brilliant. It has such colors and such emotion to it. I know you guys are going to be able to learn a lot of cool stuff. So even if you don't shoot travel as a genre, you go on vacations, you know you want great travel pics. So start getting your questions together. We're going to be able to learn a lot of really cool stuff tonight. And she has agreed to hang out after our interview. So we're going to do the Q&A together. So we'll have lots of time to answer those questions. So just really quick before we get started, I don't have a lot of business stuff for you because I know that you are anxious for this interview. So I do want to share with you guys, if you're not following me on social media, I don't know what the heck you're waiting for. So come on, right? The links are underneath, but I always try to show you guys what I'm up to, what's going on. So there is a new image that got posted this week. This is one of the images that I shot at WPPI last month out in Las Vegas. This was done in real time on stage, just to give some of you some extra stress. Those little bokeh balls that you see were done by spraying water directly on the camera lens. No filter, no nothing. Water was sprayed on the camera lens. So if you check out my social media, you can see the background and how I did it. I'll show you a real quick little image there where you can see basically in that lighting diagram, I had a strobe with a purple gel aimed right back into the camera lens. Super, super small aperture. I happen to do it at f9. If you want to change the shape of that bokeh a little bit, you can go all the way down to like f16 or f22 if your lens will permit it. That's where the color comes from without getting that purple all over the model's face. So as always, gang, just something for you guys to play around with, experiment with, have some fun with. But that was my shot that got posted this week. So hopefully you'll go check it out. I know a lot of you are going to be in Shutterfest in 2 weeks. I'll be there on Tuesday the 23rd. I'm going to be doing a lunch and learn, so hopefully I'll see some of you there. But that's it. I'm not going to take any more time because I am really looking forward to our conversation tonight. So, my guest tonight, let's start with the part that some of you have already commented about because you all know I used to be a Nikon guy. If you're looking for some drama tonight, you came to the wrong place because this is all about photography. And you guys have heard me say time and time and time again, regardless of the fact that I switched, I support all these camera companies. If any one of these camera companies struggled, the industry suffers from that. So we're not talking gear tonight except where there are specific questions. We are talking travel. And my guest is a Nikon Ambassador. Her name is Deborah Sandidge, and I'm gonna bring her up on the screen right now. Deb, it is great to have you here. I really appreciate you agreeing to take the time and chat with me tonight. So I have kind of a routine that I do with all of my guests, and that is I would like to start, and I would like you to really introduce yourself to my audience so that you can tell them what you feel is important to know about you and your work. And then, of course, we've got some great images from Deb that we're going to take a look at, and we'll go from there. So, Deb, it's all yours.
Well, thank you, Joe, very much for having me here on TogChat. I'm super excited to share some images and talk about some of the creative processes that go into image making. As you mentioned, I'm thrilled to be a Nikon Ambassador. I'm also an author. I wrote a book on digital infrared photography, which goes back into that creative process. I write for Shutterbug magazine. There's a new article. You can read those online for free. So in fact, some of the pictures that we'll be discussing are actually in and on the Shutterbug
That's
site.
awesome. And for all you watching, the link to her articles on Shutterbug, it's below the video in the description, and I'm going to post those links in the chat window while we're talking, so make sure you check them out. Go ahead, Deb.
Oh, thank you. So throughout the year, I do workshops, photo tours, and speaking engagements. Just like you, I love to connect with people. And my goal really is to inspire, motivate, and perhaps give somebody an idea about a photo tip or technique that they can apply to their own photography. So I'm super excited to be here and talk with you this evening.
Awesome. Well, again, I really, really appreciate it. So just to give all of you a little bit of background, kind of full disclosure, shall we say, I first met Deb last summer at the Out of Chicago event in Chicago, and there is a photograph that another Olympus visionary had done, and it's a shot that's been done many, many times by a lot of different people, but Mike Baining had done a shot of the Chicago Theater, and I found out Deb was doing a photo walk, so I asked her if she would mind if I tagged along, and she was very gracious to let me come along, and honestly wound up spending 2 evenings on 2 of her photo walks, had a great time. I learned a lot of really cool stuff. It was also great to be able to see how she works, because again, what I admire about her work, and you guys are going to see this in just a minute, this is not your mother's travel photography. This is not the kind of travel photography that I grew up with. This work has just such color and such emotion, and I love it. And in my opinion, Deb's truly got a very unique style in the way she approaches it, so it was great, truly, to kind of see a master at work and see how she approaches a lot of her work and the tips that she was giving to people. So all that being said, I want to dive right in. So I'm going to switch the screen over here, Deb, and the first picture that I want to bring up, one of my favorites, it's a shot of yours from, whoops, and I already jumped ahead one, let's go back there. It's a shot of yours from South Beach. I have so many questions about how you did this one, but give me a little bit of background in terms of what your setup was. And also I'm curious, so I'm going to throw this out there before we even start. I'm curious about some of your workflow in terms of, is a lot of your work self-generated, or are you doing a lot of assignment work as you're doing these various trips? I'm just trying to figure out how jealous I should be of you.
Oh, that's a great idea. In some instances, I am doing assignment work, and I'll get photos along the way, but my primary driver is to obviously fulfill the assignment. But there's a certain freedom that comes along with being able to shoot just what you feel, and I think that's really where the pictures come from. It's not necessarily what you see, but what you feel that makes for better pictures. And in this case of South Beach, I love this, and I walked around this location in the middle of the day. Of course, it doesn't tell the same story. So my creative option was, okay, I have to come back when the light is beautiful, and we have a lot of traffic. So so then I can incorporate some creative ideas like the streaks of light from passing cars, and also the blue out of the clouds. So that to me was the creative process. So I knew that how I wanted to shoot this. I wanted to get the camera at an angle so you have this dynamic flow. Anytime you can create that in an image, you have this rhythm, this flow that happens. So I had my tripod fairly low, and the traffic was so intense. So it wasn't a 10-second exposure worked out perfectly here. So technically, I'm just using a cable release. I'm setting my camera up, so I might have to narrow the aperture to extend that shutter speed to the shutter speed that I need. So 10 seconds. So in doing so technically you might try to do this, and perhaps you're at the limits of your camera. You might have to use a neutral density filter or a polarizer or something to extend. Of course, I know your circumstances are a little bit different with your camera. But the idea of that, I just wanted you to feel like what it was like to be there at that moment. The rush of the traffic, the neon lights. This is very South Beach. So that's
for me, that's really what I love about this picture. South Beach is one of my favorite places to go, and it is. There's a certain kind of fun chaos to it, almost all the time, but especially at night,
all the time.
in the evening. So now, one of the things that I guess I want people to notice about this, because there's going to be a little bit of a theme here in some of your images, and it's one of the things that I love that you do is you've got the motion of the cars, which kind of really brings in that hustle and bustle vibe to it, but also having that little bit of blur in the clouds. Actually, just it adds such a cool dimension, to the image, especially since these are these, gorgeous white puffy clouds that we're so used to seeing, these crisp, well-defined shapes and shadows, and with that little bit of blur, it's actually just really, really cool. I just love the way you do it. Now, before I go into the second image, I want to kind of lead in a little bit. When you're doing a shot like this, because I know that this is also one of your favorite times of the day to shoot, you've had the good fortune of being to many of the locations you work at, especially when you're teaching, I know many, many times over, but imagine that you had not been here before. What kind of research, like how are you prepping to, if you're going to South Beach for the first time, what work are you going to put in before you take off to know that you're going to be able to come away, or at least improve your odds of coming away with images that are going to meet your criteria?
That's a great question. So before I go to a location, I want to be able to research, and I'll look at Google Maps. I'll look at different applications that maybe we'll talk about. Maybe there's a festival in the area, so I might use something like Time Out, to see what's happening in South Beach. So I use various resources to kind of get an idea about what's happening in an area, the exact locations, and I'll go to those during the day, and then I'll say, okay, this is a night shot, or this is going to be a morning shot. So I'll kind of plan my day as far as that goes. But I use all the resources possible, and there's a lot of apps that you can use. I use the weather apps and photo pills and all those types. So those are super helpful. I use Snap Guides, which is sort of a location-based app, and that will give some ideas about time of day. But I usually find a location that I want to be my hero shot. So such as this, so I know I want to come back during the blue hour. I want to stretch those clouds and stretch those taillights from the passing cars. So yeah, so that's a huge a job before I get to a location is research. Right. Great question.
Very cool. Now, I've been at photography long enough. I understand the blue hour, so when I hear that, I tend to think, okay, I know it. But just for the benefit of maybe people that are kind of just getting started and really haven't had the opportunity to do a lot of that, define the blue hour and give us a little bit of background from your perspective about why it's so valuable to work during that time.
No, that's an excellent question. So I know what happens during the blue hour. The light is very balanced. The contrast is nice. You have this rich color in the sky, and you can see all the city lights. So those are sort of the occurrences. As far as the technical part, you can generally look at the weather app and say, okay, 30 minutes or so. But there's actually an app for that. You can. It's called Blue Hour, and you can actually figure out if you just are confused about it, when is this going to happen? It will tell you pretty much when it's going to happen. But I love sunset, so I'll plan the sunset shot, but then I'm really going to wait for that kind of dull area between sunset when the lights begin to get really beautiful, as you can see in this picture. All the neon signs are showing, and that's not going to happen at 2 o'clock. So to me, those little magical times a day, and of course this happens in the morning too, if you're so inclined to get up.
You are, right. Now, interestingly enough, do you prefer one or the other, or is that going to be more of a location-based judgment, whether you do morning or whether you do evening?
That's a great question too. Okay, so in this instance, I know there's going to be a lot more traffic in the evening, and I'm much more inclined to stay up and shoot into the night because I love the night shots too. However, when we were in Chicago, I was able to go before these places were officially sort of open, and there weren't that many people because I wanted to get the Chicago bean and also some of those crowded areas without a lot of people there. So I might do both. So it makes it really long, long days. Right. But I'm more inclined to be a night owl. But I love getting up early and getting those morning shots. So yeah, I'll do both.
I always joke that's why I could not be a nature or landscape photographer, because it requires getting up that early in the morning. And, so this next shot, another one that has a lot of motion to it. This is from, I believe, San Antonio, the Riverwalk. Tell me about this.
Well, that location was, I've been wanting to go to that location for quite a while. And you see kind of the types of shots that are posted up about the location, San Antonio. The standard shots are going to come up. So my feeling is, how can I make this more personal and unique to me? And how can I give the viewer a way of seeing this in a little bit different way? That's inspiring, it's more creative. So I was looking at the water taxis. I thought, those are really cool, but to have those frozen in time, it was just a snapshot, right? So what I wanted to do was to move past the snapshot. So I wanted to convey a sense of motion. This is a recurring thing with a lot of my work. So as the water taxis were passing, I realized I could put on a neutral density filter, and about 4 seconds, then you started to see this motion, this beautiful, graceful motion of where the taxis were moving in action. And to me, that was more expressive and more artistic than it's just a standard shot, which is beautiful. You can shoot video, you can shoot, just an establishing shot, but then I'm starting to move into more of the creative options once I've exhausted those. Right. So I love doing this, but the tip is to have a neutral density filter or perhaps a polarizer, just to be able to extend this exposure time.
Right. Now between the two, do you tend to lean one way or the other? Is your go-to more the neutral densities or the polarizer? Or?
I like to shoot, well, I have a polarizer, obviously, as we all do. I like to have a 3-stop neutral density filter. It's just about right, especially, I didn't include a lot of beach shots, but often I'm working in the 15th of a second or the 20th of a second. And here I needed to work in the 4-second range. So that enabled me to do that. So it's a creative tool. That enables me to do something a little bit different. And also the 15-stop, which we'll talk about too.
Ah, okay, cool. Yeah. So another question that I wanted to bring up here too, because especially you're talking about, being up early in the morning, having a long day, working into the night. From a gear standpoint, specifically lenses, are you more of a prime shooter? Are you more of a zoom shooter? Especially since you're doing a lot of walking around and that type of stuff, what's kind of a standard kit for you? And I realize it may vary to somewhat depending on where you're at, but.
Yes, so for that, when I'm doing my research, I kind of get a feel for what gear I'll be needing so that I could pack it and have it handy. For this one, I used a mid-range zoom because I was pretty far up on an elevated position shooting down on these boats. So a wide-angle shot was getting too much information that I didn't need to include in this. So in this, I'm using a mid-range zoom, and that would work perfectly. So that gives me an idea of what type of shots. Most of my shots will be wide angle or fisheye, or but this is perfect. So those are lenses I reach for quite a bit.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the colors. I love the fact that the way that the colors turned into kind of leading lines with the motion was just really, really brilliant.
Thank you.
So this next one, I'm guessing, is definitely not a wide angle shot. This is kind of rolling hills with some silos or that down at the bottom. But I love the tonal ranges in the color here. Tell me about this.
Yes, so you mentioned before you go to an area, what do you do? The preparation. So I had never been to, this is a Palouse area of Washington State. I'd never been. I just assumed that it would, that you'd use a wide angle lens, but actually I'm using a lens, a 200 to 500 millimeter lens with a crop sensor camera, really isolating and defining the subject here, and waiting for the right time of day. So lower light begins to have cast light and shadows and really defines those hills. So for me, it was just a matter of finding my composition, and I could do that with that lens in combination. So here you can appreciate what is in the distance by using something such as that lens. It really brings the subject closer to the viewer.
Oh, indeed. I love all the different variations of green with the blue mixing into it. Really, really awesome. So next, the Times Square image, and I know because since I've met you, I follow you on social media. So I do want you to talk about your fisheyes and the fact that you like to put fisheyes down and look up. because I've seen you talk about that in some of your posts, and I love some of the shots that you do that way. So tell us about this shot.
Oh, first of all, it's so much fun. This is an 8 to 15 millimeter zoom fisheye lens, so I had the option of a perfectly circular image or a square format image. And I've shot Times Square quite a bit. It's beautiful, but I wanted to tell a story in a different way. So for this, I was like, how can I get a feeling of being surrounded and being so insignificant in comparison to all these beautiful buildings? Right. So I tried the fisheye. I looked up, and it was just, I was enamored with what I saw. So I was able to place my camera up near the top of that flagpole area and just shoot. And get just a little bit of motion again in the flag. I love that motion. And also these buildings completely surrounding. So it gives the viewer a sense of being there at that moment.
Sure, indeed. So now, I realize these buildings are quite tall. So are you holding the camera above you, or is this camera somehow like sitting on the ground?
Well, that's a good question, because during the day, if there's a lot of people, it's almost kind of advantageous to get as low as you can, but just shoot above the people level. Or I like to get down as low as possible, but in Times Square it'll be impossible because there's so many people.
Right.
So often, in this case, it really wasn't relevant. You still get all the buildings. So I was just probably about my eye level being able to shoot up. So there's a lot of ideas that you can apply to this, but it's a different way to see Times Square, and it's certainly a lot of fun.
Absolutely. No, definitely. Very cool. Very cool. Next one of my favorite shots of yours. In fact, I think you first posted this not long after I met you, but the umbrellas, I love this.
Thank you so much. Well, my friend and I decided we were going to take a personal trip, and we started in New York, obviously we're Times Square, and moved into Montreal and Quebec City. And saw this at night, actually. We're just, I love to wander and see what's around the corner. There's that excitement of just new things. And we saw the umbrellas at night, and we were like, oh, this is great. Yeah. But I was thinking, what would happen during the day? I think we're going to get a lot more vibrant shots. So my goal was again, this goes back to scouting, and knowing. So I saw this, go back during the day. It's a clear, sunny day. To me, there was just no other way to take the shot. So I wanted to be able to make the shot and incorporate that little sunburst that you see. And again, as you mentioned before, with some of your images, varying the aperture, f11, f16, that's going to give you the different effects in the starburst. So my goal was to have the starburst, those illuminated umbrellas, and also the beautiful blue sky, and then just be surrounded by these beautiful buildings in Quebec City. Yeah. So it's a lot.
I love this, and I'm very jealous. I was in Montreal about 2 weeks after I saw you post this shot. Oh. So I'll admit, I was like, I've got to go find this because it looks so cool. I had one day, the day that I was there, it was pouring with rain the entire time. So I was like, well, it's cool, but it's not that cool. So so I passed on it. But yeah, so I was like, this is really neat. I've got to go see this, wonder what I could do. And it just was pouring with rain the entire time. So it's like, oh, well.
I got lucky
there. So I didn't realize before today that you had done a book on the infrared stuff, which is really cool. And I hadn't, previous to this, noticed a lot of your infrared stuff online. So when I saw these, I was like, wow, like this is really intense. So tell me about the image, but I'm also curious, and I know some people are going to ask about what gear and what equipment and or what modifications you're using to do the infrared.
Yes, I work with a infrared converted camera, which you can do at Live Pixel. I've worked with them for many, many years. So this is the standard conversion, what they call the 720 nanometers. This is the standard infrared conversion. And I like it because it gives you the most traditional black and white type of imagery that is very classic. So I like that look. I like the classic look. Yet there's something incredibly surreal about the way light is reflected and absorbed by different surfaces in infrared. Right. So it's not something that we can see with our eyes. This isn't a post product of editing. This is just something that happens during the capture. Right. So this is in the Palouse, and I was really enamored with the different textures because I noticed that there were some repeating textures. We have this foreground, but yet the clouds are echoing that same type of a pattern in the clouds and the farmhouse, which sort of anchors everything. So my thought was to get as low as possible. So basically, I'm standing like in a ditch, shooting as low as possible. I'm using one of my favorite lenses, is a very wide lens, a 14 to 24, and getting as much as into this composition as possible. And there's something about infrared, again, that is.
Okay, gang, I believe that you guys are back with me again here. Yep, we are back there. So I'm going to call Deborah back here, get her on the feed. We completely just lost everything from YouTube there. Bear with me 1 second. We're going to get her back. Okay. Hey, oh my goodness. Hi, Deborah.
Hey,
You're
back.
YouTube completely bounced us there. Hang on with me just 1 second. I'm going to get you right back on the air here with the pictures and get you connected to my earpiece. And we should be good to go.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, can you hear me, Deb?
I can. Can you hear me fine?
Good. I can hear you. And we are back online with your infrared picture, okay? Sorry about that, gang. YouTube bounced us out, and it let us right back in again. So we should be good to go, okay?
Okay.
All right.
Perfect. We were talking about an infrared picture, and I think probably ready to speak about, to continue on about that?
Yeah. Go ahead. I would love to hear. You were talking about how the textures in the sky were mirroring, the corn and that, which I just absolutely love this. I'm a big fan of black and white images that have just really, really a broad range of tones, and even when it's infrared, I absolutely love the range in this.
Well, yes, we were just mentioning the reflectivity and the absorption of infrared light and how different it is than just converting a color image to black and white. Right. It just adds to that surreal factor. So yes, this is definitely one of my favorite images in infrared.
Awesome. It is absolutely brilliant. So now this next one, black and white image, a night shot. Pretty sure it's not infrared, but interestingly enough, it's almost like it could be.
Like it could be. Yes. So what happens with this shot? I was just in San Francisco, and the idea of I got off the plane. I barely got the sunset and the blue hours. So I walked down to one of the piers that that are there, Pier 14, and it was beautiful. I was actually the only person on that pier, so I walked to the end. Then I could have this beautiful view of the city. And so, yes, so that what was exciting about that was that there were a couple that was walking through the scene. And they sort of stopped. So I took advantage of that. Well, this is a 30-second exposure. They were still enough, so you can just barely see that couple in. But there were some interesting cloud formations that were happening. So I could see them sort of coming up, and it's okay. I went ahead and captured this as a shorter, irregular exposure, but I really wanted to convey that sense of motion, to have that movement in the clouds. And really before going into this, I knew I wanted it to be a black and white image because of the chrome chairs and the lights. So to me, it was just very black, very white. I love all that high contrast in the shot. So 30 seconds was an easy way to go ahead and reach into that shot and be able to create that drama.
So I'm curious, Deb, because you use I see you use the clouds a lot, and they look amazing when you're doing the longer exposures because you get that little bit of motion, which actually adds some activity to what essentially is an otherwise static image. Still really cool, but it adds that motion. So what is your kind of thought process or workflow if you get to San Francisco and you're looking to do some night shots like this and it's a perfectly clear night? Do you still find yourself going after this shot, or how does that change your thought process as you're looking for shots and as you're, kind of determining what is my evening going to consist of?
Well, that happens a lot. So the best laid plans can be foiled by Mother Nature.
Right.
Any clouds, and that happens with a lot of the beach and type shots. But in this case, when I got here, there were no clouds. You could actually see the stars. But in San Francisco, if you wait long enough, the weather will change.
Right, that's true.
And that's what happened. So I noticed some of these clouds, and I thought, okay, I'll just hang out. That's why I'm here. In other cases where it doesn't change, well, then I'm thinking, okay, well, what's plan B? Is there another location I might be able to go to fill the frame with color and where the sky isn't necessarily a dominant feature? Or how can I compose perhaps where that isn't so necessary, having the clouds. So I'm always thinking of what works, what doesn't work, and what can be improved, and what the alternatives are in creativity.
Right. Yeah, I love the way you use the clouds, and it just has a whole other dimension that you don't traditionally see in travel images. So while you were in San Francisco, you went for the cable cars.
Always. Always. So this is fun. It's something that I do because I love the result, but I love the process. I love being in front of the cable cars, and it looks like you're going to be run over by this cable car because you're pretty much directly in front, and that's how I plan the shot, because if I stood off or to the left or the right, then those tracks aren't going to be the same. I want those tracks looking like they're coming right at you, so you might feel like you, as a viewer, might have to move.
Right.
So, but actually it's very safe. The tracks move over to the right, and I'm using a zoom lens. In this case, I'm using an 80 to 400 millimeter zoom lens to be able to focus on and isolate just the cable car, but also compose enough so I have a little bit of the streaks of light from the passing cars on the streets behind. So that was the idea. This is one of my favorite shots, and I've tried it with different lenses, and really it's like a 300 millimeter shot. So from experience, I know that happens, but it's also very classic San Francisco. Right? I don't think you can leave San Francisco without a cable car shot.
Cable car, right? Indeed. Oh, very cool. So the next up one, and I'm on the fence. I'm going to guess this is not infrared. Am I wrong?
Are we talking about?
This is a water shot with a really long pier and some amazing clouds.
This was fun. I was actually driving on my way to South Beach, and I was about parallel with Melbourne, and I could see off on the right all these clouds that were developing in the and I'm thinking I have to pull off. I have to. It's just so beautiful, This is, and that's the thing in photography. You have to shoot it when you see it. Right. So I pulled off to the Melbourne Pier, and there was a developing storm, and the clouds were magnificent, and so I could capture them in a snapshot, 125th of a second kind of a thing. But my goal for this shot was to show you a developing storm, what's happening over 6 minutes of exposure time. So obviously in that realm of time frame, I need to use a neutral density filter, a 15-stop neutral density filter, which reduces the amount of light that reaches the camera and allows you to take images that are in that long time. So the clouds are evolving and they're developing, and this is what I wanted the viewer to feel. I just like this is happening at this moment. Yet at that same time, you have this push-pull tension of the developing clouds, but you also see the very calm water and then that vanishing point of the pier. So again, the lens choice is essential in this. It wouldn't tell the same story with a 24 to 70 millimeter lens.
So now, I am curious. We live in a world of creativity that is aided by Photoshop, and I am of the mentality, I don't care if an image has a lot or has almost none, I care about the finished image. I think it's cool that with Photoshop we can kind of dream beyond our cameras or imagine beyond our cameras, and if we have the skills, we can create it. So using a shot like this as an example, because obviously this is, essentially you did this in camera, which is brilliant. Do you ever approach a subject like this or a subject matter like this with the idea of, let me do a series of composites to basically assemble something? Or do you tend to prefer to work like, I'm going to do it in camera and I'm, going to walk away with the image?
No, oh, that's a fabulous question. And that goes back to me and personal projects and some of the things that really touch my heart. So we don't have the picture to show, but in some instances, I like to work with the evolution of the clouds. I want to be able to show that motion, but maybe not 15 stops. So I may work with a series of multiple exposures, or I may shoot a time lapse and then put all those images together in Photoshop and use light and blend mode, which you could do with the card trails and all kinds of little scriptures. But no, so I feel in that case, it's post-processing is a creative tool, and that it extends the art of what I'm doing. So no, I don't feel that way at all. I'm not encumbered by that type of reality.
No, that's very cool. That's very cool. I mean, obviously, when an image like this is done in camera, it's like mad props. It's like, that's awesome. But I can imagine a lot of people asking, like, well, especially for beginners, it's kind of like, well, which is the best way? Well, the best way is the way that gets you what you're looking for in the end and what you're capable of doing. But so, yeah, the idea that you're able to do this in camera, I love that. I absolutely do. So. Well,
I like that there's options. I mean, this is one way of doing it, but there's many ways of accomplishing it. And it really depends on the story that you want to tell and the experience that you want to share. So.
Yeah, no, indeed. So I saved this one for last because purple is one of my favorite colors. So, and I love just the range of colors in the shot, and it's got more of those gorgeous clouds with motion. So tell me about this one.
Okay, so that was taken in France. There's a beautiful plain, it's called the Valençon Plain, and that's where all the lavender blooms. And to me, it's just so beautiful. There's so many different ways to capture this. So I shot it a lot of different ways. I shot it as a time lapse. I shot it, in a movie, it's kind of boring because you really can't see the clouds move. So that's where the time lapse comes in handy. But I really wanted to share in a single image how the clouds are painted across the sky with wind. So Mother Nature's helping me be the artist here, and I'm just recording the action. So I set up my camera, my wide angle lens, and I had about 15 stops of neutral density filter. So over the period of 6 minutes, you can see how the clouds are painted across the sky. And also there's this really cool surprise factor because I don't know what it's going to really look like. I don't know which direction the wind takes these clouds. So there's always that element of surprise. So I was really happy. This is very, very early in the morning. And I like the graphic elements. So the red rocks, the purple lavender, and the beautiful clouds. So it's one of my personal favorites.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely gorgeous. Truly love it. So I know, first of all, I have so many questions, but I know we've also got some questions from some of the people watching. I want to start with one that got posted a little bit early before I forget it because I don't want to miss this question, and I think it's a great question, similar to kind of a question that I get asked a lot about my photography. John asked, what made you go for travel? How did that get started? And then are there any photographers either today or in the course of you developing your career that really inspired you in that process?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think what happened was when I was writing the book for infrared photography, I wanted it to be well-rounded and include a lot of areas that, I didn't want to be my backyard pictures of infrared. So I wanted to be well-rounded. And in that process, I really fell in love with travel a lot more because feeling with the camera, it's a different dynamic, and it takes you into places and puts you in situations that I wouldn't have experienced before. So absolutely, I'm inspired by a lot of different people. I'd say the person I was so inspired with originally was Versailles. He wrote a book on Paris at night. You know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
It's a beautiful book. I mean, this man timed his exposures with cigarettes at night.
Yes.
So I knew how long the exposure was going to be. But I look at these pictures and I'm so enamored with Paris. And so I've returned many, many times. And it almost like begin to put your head into what someone was thinking, the great masters.
Right.
So that was probably an evolutionary point.
That's very cool. Very cool. So you haven't done travel your whole career then? Travel started kind of at the same time you're working the book?
No, I've always traveled, but really, I think it really kicked in about that time. So with it, sure, yes.
Right. And so prior to making that your focus, and aside from the infrared, what kinds of photographic things have you done in your career?
So I used to photograph birds. I know that might come as a shock.
Really? Okay.
So I kind of went through different phases where I was really interested in one thing or another.
Right.
But I also think that being super passionate about the one thing you're interested in helps you become a better photographer.
Yep.
So it was actually one of my bird shots that Nikon noticed. They were so interested in this. Like, what did you do? It was just more. Ended up being kind of a poetic image of this bird, with the wing extended and the light, kind of a dramatic thing. But it was something I was very passionate about and I liked doing. So they wanted me to elaborate on that story. So I photographed birds for quite a while, and it's still a beautiful art form. And so I started to work. I always wanted to work with infrared, but the film, it's way too complicated.
Yes.
And then. So when I realized I could put an infrared filter on the lens, that changed everything.
Very cool. Very cool. It's always interesting to kind of hear the beginnings for so many people because I've never met a photographer that's essentially done the same stuff their entire career. And I think part of it is just that creative process. Sometimes we get bored with things. Other times it's kind of a shiny object syndrome. Like here's something new that becomes very exciting. And you use the word that's always important to me, and that's passion. It's whatever is driving me passionately at the time. That's what I'm going to want to pick up the camera and work with. So you've mentioned a couple of your ND filters in that, but Simo's asking what stop ND filter do you use the most? Do you have kind of a go-to that you would say, like, this is my prime and then I'm going to use the others for special needs, or?
Yes, and that's a good question to ask yourself what is your goal for the long exposure shots? Did you want to get something like that one pier shot where you have those developing clouds and you're
Okay, gang, you should have me back again. Give me just a second, and I'm going to get Deborah back. They dropped us again. So let's try this one more time here. Okay. Hey, it happened again, but I got you back. Let me get you back on the screen here again. YouTube is just not being nice tonight, but we'll get this shot back up here. All right.
So, yeah, we were just talking about what tool.
Indeed, John, I have a feeling that it is some of the storms that are going on that are messing with YouTube, but let's do this again. Bear with me 1 second, guys. I just need to get my sound set up so that I can hear Deborah again. And I should be good to go here. Okay. All right. Deborah, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Perfect. I can hear you back. Awesome. We are good to go, gang. All right. So you were about to tell me about your go-to ND filters.
So my go-to ND filters, the ones that I always carry with me.
Yep.
I'm going to, for the daytime shots, when I want a really long exposure, I'm going to reach for a 15 stop. That seems to be perfect. 10 stops is usually a little shy of where I need to be, but 15 gets me pretty much in the ballpark. We have some very slow moving Florida clouds, so.
Right.
So, but also for the shorter long exposures, I like to have a 3-stop handy.
Okay.
So,
What are your thoughts on like the variable ND filters and that type of stuff? Because it sounds like you're using specific ones. You avoid the variable NDs, or?
with the wide angle lenses, they didn't always play nice. You might have some vignetting, and I'm very sensitive about that. And I found that I could just easily get what I need by making other adjustments, whether it be ISO or shutter aperture or shutter speed, to be able to get that. So 3-stop, 15-stop, those are always in my bag.
Cool, very cool. So another one that just came up here, well actually this is kind of an important one. Michael's asking about, where is your infrared book available? Where can I get it?
Okay, it's available on Amazon. So it was recently out of print, but you can still find copies on Amazon. It's digital infrared photography under my name, yes.
Awesome, very good. And guys, I'll find a link to that and I'll put it in the description when we're done. So if you can't find it, just make sure you check back and we'll make sure that you have a link in there, okay? Let's see, I had another one here. Peter was asking, and I know the answer to this, but it's worth talking about because this is one of those questions I'm sure you get a lot with some of these. There was a question earlier about this same idea. He's asking, the lavender shot at the end, was it a composite? The clouds were blurry, but the lavender appears sharp.
Yes, and that's a sort of an interesting phenomenon. I noticed that because I shot at a marina, and it was a long exposure. The clouds were very blurred, but yet the boats were relatively sharp. So what happened was the boats kept coming back to the same position. So over time, they're relatively sharp. So sometimes that doesn't happen that way. But yes, that was a single shot. So the lavender does appear very sharp. The lavender actually is a very stiff type of a plant. It's also full of bees.
Okay, that's good to know, right?
But yes, cool. So that was a single shot.
Awesome. So here we get a good business question here. What's the market for travel photography like these days? This is a question I get a lot in pretty much every genre. It's, in addition to that question, are there opportunities for up-and-coming photographers? So I'm going to twist that question a little and basically ask you, we're going to do the end in the middle. The question that I normally ask at the end of every TogChat is, if you could give one piece of advice to anybody starting out as a travel photographer today with everything that you've experienced and learned, what would that be, first of all? And then if somebody wants to try and, shall we say, make a career out of it, what do they need to be looking at doing?
Okay, with that question, I think that the answer is, I hate to be cliche, but not to have all your eggs in one basket. To be well-rounded, to be a good social media marketer. I hate to use the word self-promote, but you really have to be conscious of your work and put it out there so people can see it. And that's really a big place where people are going to notice you. I wouldn't isolate. Some people just want to do one thing. Maybe they want to go out and they just sell prints or something. So, but I think that the key is to be well-rounded. So I generally, I'm speaking about my work. I'm doing workshops. I'm doing different things in the community as far as educational type of things. So I think being well-rounded is key. You can't just say, I'm going to be a travel photographer and everybody's going to pay my way. That's not it.
But you mean those people on Instagram aren't making lots of money doing that? Really?
Yes, I think the Instagram people are getting tired of their places being used. You have to be mindful of the community and careful about where you're going and again, just do a variety of things. So it's not just one single thing. So I try to think about that when I'm going. So maybe I'm not just shooting stills. Maybe I'm trying to shoot a little video or something that's going to be able to tell a well-rounded story. So when I'm shooting, my output thinking is that I want to have work that can be used in a variety of ways. So maybe it would be good to have some of these interior pastry shots rather than this big bridge shot. So, I try to, I tend to get very obviously attracted to the grand outdoors, but there's a lot of detail shots. So I'm trying to make myself think about what would a client want or what would be important to someone else too. So it's good to have that in mind.
Right. So I know you told me very early on in the conversation that you really like one of the first things you look for when you go to a new place is you look for that hero shot, which completely makes sense. And I was going to ask you just to prod a little bit. Do you ever do work where you're intentionally looking for people in the scene? And since I'm a people shooter, I have to ask that question. Or is it really for you? Is it about the location? And if people are in the scene, it's really more in the sense of this is how they interact with that location, et cetera. What's your thought process there?
That's very subjective. So sometimes I think it's very important to have, like in that San Francisco shot, even though it's a small shot,
right?
In the expanded version, you can see there's a couple in the center.
Right.
To me, that made it perfect. It just needed that element, that human element. So I've looked for situations where I can incorporate people, but often with 6 minutes, they aren't there.
Right. There is that too, right? Right.
But using maybe a 3-stop neutral density filter where the people are slightly blurred, that can be very beautiful also. It depends on what the end goal is, but certainly to have people in the scene it is important. But I think it depends on the type of photography that you're doing. If you want to show, I was in Cuba recently for Castro's memorial service, and there was a ton of people, but that's what you wanted to be able in Revolution Square, and having the people there in relationship to the area, that was important because it showed what was happening. So again, it goes back to the subject and what story you want to be able to tell.
Oh, very cool. So with a lot of especially with so many Instagram photographers today and so much imagery being used all over the web, do you run into any issues? New York is coming to mind, and I don't know if you had a chance to photograph with the vessel yet, but of course there was the big story about how just by going there you agree to essentially turn over your rights. Do you run into any issues at all, or do you worry about needing releases for property releases and that type of stuff, or is it kind of on a job by job or image by image basis that you deal with that?
Oh, that's an important question that comes up in some locations, well, like the Eiffel Tower when the lights are on. Those are copyrighted technically. I don't think there's great harm in using it for social media purposes, but somebody else may take exception. I was in New York photographing in Times Square, and I had walked up some steps and I was shooting, and then all of a sudden there was somebody beside me. It was a police officer. And he was super nice. He goes, you really can't be here, but if you take your shot, it's fine. But I understand, there's certain places that you can't shoot. But what you mentioned, the new structure is very copyrighted, and they will sign me a lawyer, and that's fine. I try to avoid a situation where it's sometimes this is a little overkill, what they're requesting, but I respect that. That's their building, that's their personal property. So I try to shoot something in a different way, and that's where you were, which is so magnificent. You were talking about photographing with great depth of field, and there's soft focus in the background. Maybe you get a hint of what maybe the Eiffel Tower and this beautiful couple. So there's really creative ways around that to get to your goal.
That's cool. Cool. That's good to know. So is that something, I mean, obviously so many of these places like France and I'm sure you've been there multiple times at this point. Is that something you will actively research before you go to a new area or a new town, new place to photograph, in terms of is there anything that I need to be concerned with before I invest a lot of time shooting this structure or whatever?
Structures are one thing. I think in some places that you go in the world, the people are sensitive about being photographed. And that certainly goes back to research and finding out how people would respond and what is appropriate and what you should do in that situation. And that's when it's good to have a local guide, because they're going to give you, say, okay, well, we really don't want to give people cash, but we want to be able to donate something to the village, or and so you follow those little guiding light points and see what happens there. So it goes back to research, and you kind of get an idea what you can and cannot do. And take it with a grain of salt.
Sure. Oh, right. So I think I know the answer to this, but it's worth asking. Jeff asked, do you at this point, do you only shoot digital or do you use film as well?
That is an interesting question. So we were talking about starting out. So one of the first things I did when I was starting out photography, I was working with a day lab, and I was developing my digital prints into film and putting them on alternative surfaces. So it was
cool. Okay.
so it was just a really cool thing. So I loved that process. I used to develop my own film, and there's something very hands-on and personal, and you've got it on there. So I do have my Nikon F100, but I don't use it anymore because I feel there's such great flexibility in digital. So and my time is limited. If I'm going to be doing that kind of thing, I want it to be in the field shooting.
Right. So I'm surprised, honestly, nobody's asked it. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the question. I know that you have used a lot of different Nikon cameras. I remember seeing you using, the D850, but then of course the mirrorless cameras came along, and I've seen your social media posts, and I know you're really kind of living with the mirrorless cameras at this point. How much of your work at this point is mirrorless? Are you still shooting with the DSLRs? And just because it's bound to come up now since I opened the door, they've already heard my take on the one card slot issue, which is it's not an issue, but how do you feel about that, and how does it impact your work?
Well, actually, yes. So the first part of your question was, am I shooting with mirrorless? And that has been an evolution, because as you notice on social media, people will say, well, are you using the D850 or are you using the D5, which are beautiful cameras, actually one of the finest cameras. And I love them, but for a lot of these beach shots and things that I'm doing at low angle, I really need that tilt monitor. That's been just so phenomenally helpful. So I couldn't really say, okay, today's Tuesday, yep, I'm shooting with digital. I couldn't really say that. I just say it's an evolution. It happened. When I went to San Francisco, I didn't even think about it. I had picked up the bag. I had a new bag that I was using that I was super excited about. I could put all my cameras, my lenses, and it's a slide bag, so I could just each one out, each lens, and just work with that. So it's the mirrorless system, and I tend to walk, 6-7 miles, a day, and that makes a difference if I'm carrying a D5. I mean, I'd love to do that, maybe a studio type of thing where I don't have to walk 7 miles. But yeah, so I do like that. So, and the card slot issue, absolutely, that was a big buzz that everybody picked up on, and oh my gosh, this is But I've been using the XQD cards when they first came out, and when they came out for the mirrorless, it's never been an issue. So, and now we have a different system that is retroactive for that, and it never occurred to me as a travel photographer. I know it might have been an issue for some of the wedding photographers, but I think they've really worked past that now and are more confident in the technology, because the technology is forward thinking.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it makes sense to me. I feel like the whole card slot thing was horribly overblown. But now I am curious, since we're talking about memory and the cards. So when you are traveling, what is your workflow? So you've been out shooting for a day. You got up at sunrise. You did sunrise. You've made your rounds during the day. Do you take some type of an external hard drive system, or do you take a computer? Do you download at that point, or do you basically keep things on the cards till you get back? What's your workflow?
Oh, that's a great question. So yes, and yes. So
okay.
Yes. So when I'm out shooting, I come back at the end of the day. First thing, download the images, and I do a quick review. Maybe there's some bizarre piece of dust or something there, so I don't want to do this the whole trip. So I kind of review the images, get a feel for what direction I'm going with that, and so I do. And also I'll bring external hard drives, and I'll bring a laptop and be able to work with it there, and have everything downloaded. And so yes, absolutely. Cool.
And I should know this, but I don't know this. What are the capacity ranges on the XQD cards in terms of how many gigs?
The new ones, I think 120. I've got one right here, so I can show you.
That's plenty of capacity.
Yes, I don't know if you can see that.
Yep.
But yeah, that is, and there's the twice as large also. Right. So I tend to do. I've got 250 and then the 120 or whatever it is.
Right.
So yeah, the two different sizes.
Right. Cool. Very cool. So we got another question here from Jean Edward. He mentions you're clearly a fan of expressing emotion in the photos. He also noticed, probably went and checked your social media, you do the cinemagraphs, which are really cool, by the way. He's asking, do you do them with Photoshop or using a specific app for them?
Okay, for that was a lot of fun. I was just so enamored with that. I mean, I can take my picture and make it look, I can animate my picture.
Yep.
So at first, yes, before Photograph, and that's the software, before Photograph came out, I was doing them in Photoshop. So there's a way, to work with animation. But Photograph made it 10 times easier. So I actually did animate that balanceful plane picture in the past. So there is one probably on Facebook. And that's a very creative kind of way. In doing that process, it also shows you what you can do next time. It's like, okay, maybe I should shoot a time lapse of this and actually have that, which I did do with that shot.
Right.
So yeah, that's fun stuff. And I think that's one of the important things. Yes, it's great to be creative and it's great to be able to have all these series images, but it's also super important to have fun with it.
Oh,
have fun with the photography.
I completely agree. So another one here from Jeff. It's about scouting. We talked a little bit about this before, but I have a feeling he may have missed the beginning portion of the show with us. So let's touch on this. Do you just tend to set out and experience your locations when you get there, and kind of keep an eye out for interesting stuff? Because I know you mentioned that sometimes you'll see a location, decide, hey, it's going to be great if I come back during the blue hour, if I come back in the morning, or are you really kind of mapping things out in advance, especially if you've been to a location before? Because doing the amount of traveling you do, you sometimes have the luxury of I've been to this city, and if, like, for instance, I know obviously you know your way around Chicago, and you've done Chicago a few times. So are you more likely to kind of go back down to the waterfront and do a skyline at the fountains, or are you more likely to say, no, I want to find a spot of the town that I've never been to before? Like, what's your approach to that?
Yes. So with that, I tend to fall in love with certain locations, and I'm in Buckingham Fountain. Yeah, near and dear to my heart. It's stunning, and light conditions change. So I was watching that last time I was there, and I went there about 10 o'clock at night, totally clear night. But sure enough, we had some interesting clouds come floating back. So I will research a location, let's say Chicago in general, and find out what the alternative shots are. But I do return to my favorite shots because I know the conditions are going to be different, and I can get something a little more unique. And experience is the best teacher. You've shot something, but when you go back to shoot it again, you can shoot it in a different way. Right.
And so that being said, do you ever find, for instance, you'll visit a place, you do a shot, and you like the shot, but the weather didn't quite cooperate, or you kind of didn't quite get the clouds that you wanted? Does that kind of go into the mental checklist of, all right, next time I go back, I'm going to go and redo that shot if the weather's correct? Like, I like the angle, I like the positioning, or will you still just go off on a completely different version of it?
No, I always hope for the best conditions, but as you well know, we're subject to the weather and the conditions as they happen. So then I start to think about what creative tools I might be able to use, or maybe it's an angle, maybe I get up really high, or maybe I get really low. When I was in Cuba a few years ago, and I had gone to an area that I had never been to, Santiago, on the other side of the island, from Havana, and it was beautiful. I did a little homework, but there was this one church I really wanted to photograph. So from the pictures, I found myself directly in front of the church, looking up at this huge, even with a wide lens, it was crazy. But again, the little scouting showed me that if I got up on a rooftop, and looked down, then I had this beautiful perspective, first elevation, then I could show the entire structure of the cathedral, and hope for some nice clouds. There were actually some nice clouds. So it was a much different composition than the one I had in my mind, but that's good to be flexible. You have a vision, but then you have to be able to be flexible and work with variations.
Oh, very cool. So with regards to the gear, I used to hate these questions, but they come up all the time. So I'm going to ask it since I'm not a travel photographer, and since I'll admit when I vacation, like when I'm not working, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I'll admit it. When I'm vacationing, I'm one, it's like I'm almost happy to, use the iPhone if something comes up. And I've been trying to break myself out of that habit, mainly just because I need to practice what I preach and set a better example. So I tend to, if I'm going to vacation and kind of take a couple days off, I will travel light and especially now with the Olympus gear, I'll maybe take a Pen F and a wide angle lens. If you were traveling to a city like Chicago, and you can only take one lens.
Ooh.
I know, which right, I get that. For anybody that does what you do or what I do, that's kind of like, wait, that's not fair. But if you could only take one lens that's is going to kind of get you the things that you like to do the most, what's that lens going to be?
That historically. It depends on, the type of pictures that I want to be able to come away with. Right. Recently, it's just been a wide angle lens. If I can pick up something in the 16-35 or 14-24, I feel like that is going to work often for me because I like to incorporate the sky into my shots. So right. There are some lenses that are broad range, like a 28-300. I used to call it the street sweeper. so right. You get the wide angle shots, and right. Especially for somebody who's doing this just as a dedicated enthusiast, and they're with their family, and the family hears the shutter click, and you're supposed to be done. Right. So yes, if you have something that's really sort of broad range and far-reaching as far as both ends of the spectrum, that's super helpful.
Right. So based on those lenses, you're not super worried about, oh my God, is it like a 1.8 or a 1.2 lens? That's not much of an issue for you?
Yeah, that's a great question, because if I'm working with something, let's say those developing clouds, right. If I don't necessarily need a lens that's super fast, right. Because I want the exposure to be as long as possible. So that's an f4 lens that I was using right. in that instance. I do shoot with a 1.4 is like a 20 millimeter, but that's super, I'm freezing the action in really low light, and that's very specific, maybe some stars or something. So that's a nice lens to use in that situation. So I've been really happy with the lenses. The 2.8, 14-24 is just mind-boggling. It's really one of my favorite lenses. It's also one of the largest lenses that I have. Right. So, when I carry it, it requires a special filter system. But I love it. I don't mind.
Yeah. Very cool. So I actually think the answer to this question is fairly obvious, but it's here. So we'll go ahead and we'll answer it. A Japanese Dream is asking, do you think that mirrorless cameras like the Z6 and the 7 are the future for Nikon?
That is a fabulous question. I just saw a quick little blurb on social media about how the Z6 was named camera for, it was the NAB, for video, and that's something that I hope to see and people getting involved with, not just stills, but capture a little video, you can right. shoot in slow motion. You can get all these really cool things. So I think it's very well-rounded. I truly believe that mirrorless is the future, and as you experienced, it's right. just, it's phenomenal to have a camera. So I've got this little one. It's so much smaller, lighter. I can put it in. Yep. Carry it on so much more. I can walk further, and it's so technologically advanced. So even from what we have currently. So I truly believe that's the future, and it's evolving. As we speak.
Oh, for sure. Yep, for sure. So we've been talking a lot about cameras, lenses, that kind of stuff. So travel requires airports, TSA, that kind of stuff. So one piece of gear that I want to ask you about before we get into maybe kind of any packing tips, that you may have. Sure. You mentioned using tripods a lot.
Yes.
Obviously, you're doing a lot of walking around. So what is kind of your go-to? And if I recall, you also like the platypod, right?
I do. I love the platypod. That's a brilliant invention. So in San Francisco, there's a seawall, and there's a lot of places that are a seawall. I can actually place the platypod on the ledge and get some phenomenal shots. I did this in New York, actually. I was shooting a time-lapse with a camera just perched over the ledge, and it would be impossible to do that with a regular tripod. So the platypod is great. If you're somewhere in Las Vegas, you're always going to get pinged for, you're not supposed to have a tripod here,
Right.
but no one notices the platypod. It's
Right.
it's just a fantastic little device. So, and there's so many creative applications. I love, when I first started working with it, I got low with that and I actually placed it on the ground right at the eye level of swans that were actually come up biting my fish islands.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is biting distance. But what cool shots, right? I mean,
Right.
you're really changing. Your viewer is right there at eye level. So that's one of the beauties of using something like that. So what about shooting in the rough waters of the east coast of Florida? We have a whole different dynamic. So it requires a much, I usually put my tripod over a rock. It has to be fairly elevated for that. So I'm using I'm using a really right stuff tripod in that case, just because of the surf and the action and trying to get that. So it's very stabilized. And for city shooting, I was a little Gitzo. That's awesome. It actually strap on my bag, and I can bring that.
Cool.
So super
Very
handy.
cool. So on the travel side of it, navigating airports, packing gear, I'm assuming that you take your cameras on the plane with you, not put them in the hold. Do you ever wind up packing any gear, or will you pack? Well, we can't pack spare batteries anymore, but do you wind up packing any accessory type stuff, or what's a normal travel kit for you like?
That's a good question. So it really depends on where I'm going. I'll be going to Tanzania later in August, and I probably won't be able to get my long lens there, but I've packed them successfully in the past. Right. Generally, I like to keep all my gear with me, and I'll still try that because I have a new beautiful 500 millimeter lens that's super small and light, so I might be able to take it with me on the plane. But yes, so I try to, in some instances you could ship stuff, but I've never done that. So I keep everything that I can keep. And certainly having the platypod, because then you have backup. You've got a nice tripod head. You've got and that can be with you. The tripod itself, a larger tripod, it would be easier just to put in a suitcase. So.
Right. Yeah, I know that's what I frequently do when I'm traveling for workshops, and I have to fly. Like the tripod goes in the suitcase, and at least for me, the main reason I need it is because of tethering and doing demos. I'm not a tripod guy in the studio, but if I'm doing a demo and the live view is on the screen, people are getting motion sickness if I'm walking around with the camera. So I take a tripod just so people don't have to get sick watching the presentation. So it wouldn't be the end of the day if my tripod didn't make it. But yeah, I usually stick them in a suitcase. So any little TSA tidbits that you have come across or experiences that you have found have helped you to not have your bags, inspected or that kind of stuff? I did a video on this a little while ago, and every now and then somebody comes up with a neat little piece that I haven't encountered yet. So I'm always curious, what's working for other people?
What's in the bag? Yes, that's always good. So I like to, first of all, global entry if you're traveling, that's in TSA, it's so essential because you're not having to dig out a lot of this stuff. Don't put a crystal ball in your check-on because they don't understand what that is.
Okay.
Yeah, that I did that once or twice. And no, okay, don't do that. I pack something called it's by Toomey. It's a tracker, so it's a luggage locator. So at any given point, I know that my luggage has arrived in a certain location. I have a connecting flight. Oh, it's arrived here in St. Louis. It's it's arrived here. So, and I did have that happen one time where I arrived, but my luggage was still in New York. But I knew where it was, and I also knew when it came, and I also knew where it was in the building. So that type of accountability is just very peace of mind to have that type of device. So I like to use that. TSA, and I try to pack as light and simple as possible. Again, that goes back to what locations I'm going to be shooting and working with that. And, I like to carry, simple things, extra jacket, scarf, lots of, a lot of little things, but I'll keep everything handy.
Yeah. So I think I know the answer to this, but you mentioned before when we were talking about releases and property releases and things like that, the idea of sometimes when you go into, or actually, I'm sorry, no, it was when we were talking about people and pictures. You mentioned the idea of sometimes having like a local guide. So you mentioned you're doing Tanzania. For trips like that, especially that are outside the country and more remote places, are you generally relying on local guides that you're hiring? And I'm sure by this time, some of these trips, if you've done them before, you've probably got relationships established with certain people, or how do you go about that?
Well, the local guide is going to be able to help because there could be language barriers. You know, someplace like Peru or someplace in Africa where they might not really understand the concept. So people are really nervous about the concept of a model release. You know, what is that's where, you know, if you have somebody to really interpret this and describe what the outcome of the images are for, and that potentially you could send them back. So in that case, I defer to the local guide or the organizer to be able to help in that instance.
Right. No, I mean that definitely makes a lot of sense. So I am curious if you're allowed to say, you mentioned that you had a cool new bag that you really liked.
Yes.
Can you tell us what bag it is or who makes it?
Yes. Okay. So I've been working, actually, I'm an ambassador for F-Stock Gear, and I've been working with them for many years. So my first trip to Tanzania, I was using what they call the Loka, which is a beautiful bag. It's quite large, but I had really large gear.
Right.
And so then I sort of segued towards a bag called the cashmere, and the cashmere is designed for women, and it's a very, you know, it fit very comfortably and I carry a lot of gear. This trip, I worked with a new bag. It's called the Fitzroy, and what I loved about this bag is, I don't know if you can, do we have visual here?
Yeah, if you bring it up higher. Yep.
All right. So this little bag I was able to bring with me, and I could put like three lenses. I've got all my filter bag here. This opens up, I can put a little jacket. What I liked about the city shooting is I could put it's sort of a sling bag, and I could swing it over here without putting the down.
Okay.
So yeah,
cool. And it looks like it's water repellent?
Yeah, so it's got a mountain outdoor finish, and they just sent it for me to try out, and I'm totally in love with that. Because the idea was, my conflict was, when I go into the city, I don't want to take a bag, I don't want to put it on the ground and try to open it and do that, because there's so many people. In that instance, I really want to keep everything fluid and easy, so I was just able to swing that bag, change lens or whatever I need to do, and keep all my personal belongings without the bag ever leaving my back. And it's just lends itself towards the mirrorless system because it's lighter, leaner, faster, and very highly organized. So yeah, I really enjoyed using that. And that's like, being organized and having your gear exactly where you need it helps you in the field. Absolutely. Right. So that little one is the Fitzroy.
No, actually, it looks very nice. I will definitely. I will be the first one. I have a bag problem. I have a really bad bag problem. I've got a bag for probably damn near every shooting situation known to man, and those that I have not even yet dreamed of, I've got a bag for it. So yeah, I'm fine when it comes to gear at behaving and not going crazy on gear, but bags, I just can't help myself. Like I will admit, I have a bag problem. So I have way too many bags.
I gotcha. I understand that.
Yeah. So
and the right one for the situation is key.
It does. It makes a big difference. Right. It definitely makes a difference. So we're coming down to the wire here. So the last couple questions that I would like to ask you, folks, if you've got any last minute questions, stick them in there now. Now's the time. Okay. But I know that you, as an educator, and I've watched you work with people. I've seen how you kind of coach people and things like that, which I admire the way you approach it. And I know that you will give me a very politically correct answer because you're much better at that than I am. But so you can rephrase this however you wish, but I'm going to kind of ask it the Joe way. I know that as I travel and I work with students and I talk with people on YouTube. So like one of the things that you'll hear me tell people when we sign off tonight is if they've been here for the whole 90 minutes, they're not allowed to come back and watch next week unless they spend at least 180 minutes with the camera in their hand this week. I'm honored that they will watch me and I love them for doing that, but I don't want their photography career to be based on watching YouTube. I want it to be based on taking pictures.
Sure.
So I guess what I'm asking you to do is in a politically correct way, vent a little bit about what you find new/young, so they don't necessarily have to be young in age, but new photographers, what you find them doing that's not helping them to progress. And let's face it, we all have those moments as educators where we're dealing with a student or students, and the question gets asked, and in our gut, it's that moment of, that's such a stupid question. Like, you should know better by now. And of course, we have to catch ourselves. It's like, well, wait, it's not a stupid question for them. But I know for me, especially with YouTube, I find one of my biggest challenges is dealing with the fact that some people just kind of get in their own way with the learning process. What do you find people are struggling with that? And if you could just kind of fix that process, what would you have people doing differently to really kind of help progress in, we'll call it a career, whether it be a money-making career or just the career path of becoming better at their photography?
For that answer, I would say pick a clear vision. You may have several different passions, but pick one that you really want to learn about and just own it after time. And you may reach, obviously, for YouTube and for other sources. But as you're doing this, if you want to go shoot Paris, practice first. I want to get these cars. You don't want to get to Paris and then try to figure out, how do we do car trails? Was it apertures? Have that nailed beforehand. So I would say, follow your passion. Try not to get distracted by all the stuff that's on the internet, because there's so much. Don't get bedazzled by the huge influencers, and be inspired by them, but just don't worry so much about that. Just find something that you love to do and follow it, and follow your heart. Find out everything there is there to know about that and practice it, and then go out and shoot, and so experience again is the best teacher. So if you're out and you go in the field and you're trying to discover, I can't go past 30 seconds here, how do I do this? And then you remember, okay, it's that neutral density filter that I need to add to the equation. So I would say just pick one thing and work on that, because it's so hard to jump in and say, okay, I'm going to do people, but I want to do waterscapes. Yeah, I want to do birds, and that's all good, But if you try something, I learned a lot by shooting birds. First of all, patience. Because first of all, there wasn't somebody to say, okay, birds, we're going to be here at 7:30. They're going to come, and it takes a lot of patience. But you have to be ready. So going through that process of learning what to be ready for and shooting, and accepting that not everything's going to be perfect. It's just going through that experience.
No, that's excellent. You're definitely preaching to the choir here, and I think that is really a very good point. Even from a business standpoint, I wind up reminding people, like, listen, if you really want to have any kind of success in business, be very, very careful about being a jack of all trades and a master of none. So I think I do agree with you from the learning curve that it's not that you can only ever do one thing in your career, but to really focus on one thing at a time. I think that's an excellent idea. So I have two last minute questions that snuck in here. From Rich, you mentioned a luggage tracker. What was the name of it again?
It's by Tumi, so Tumi, and I like that. I was using one called TrackDot, but they aren't as updated as the Tumi tracker. So the small locator that I have, it's just you just charge it, you put it, turn it on, you put it in your suitcase and forget it. But I have an app, so there's an app tells me, okay, my luggage is in the vicinity of the Orlando airport. Right. So and also it has a hotel mode. So if I don't want my luggage, or if I want to be aware if my luggage was moved, I could put it on this mode. So it's just a little peace of mind.
So like, you mean if housekeeping does your room?
So so then you can panic.
You have just cost me money. I will admit, and I feel bad, because it's not like every housekeeper at every hotel is a bad person. They're certainly not. But I'm one of those paranoid people. I will leave the do not disturb sign on the door, just because I know I've got a computer and all that other stuff sitting in the room.
Well, housekeeping will watch your back. Always tip housekeeping.
Well, that too. Yes, indeed. Yep. But
it's just a nice thing to have.
Yeah, that's good. That's good to know. So a question here from Simo with regards to the ND filters and the filter systems. what system, and I know that you've got more than one that you work with because you kind of mentioned the one lens requires a specialized filter, but what's your go-to brand? What is your preferred set of filters?
I have worked with Stingray for many, many years. So Stingray has designed filters for the 14 to 24, which are huge. They're very large. Yep. So I use that with that particular system. And then I also have a smaller system that works with the 77 or larger filters. Right. So yeah, I do use Stingray most. And they have some very nice creative. They have a golden blue polarizer, which is one of those ones that you would reach for on an insanely long day when you want to mix things up. So I do like their filters. Very good glass.
Yeah, and Simo, I can tell you the Stingrays are not cheap, but they're very, very high quality. So
absolutely. Yeah, I still have old ones I've worked with, so yes.
Yeah, definitely good stuff. Well, Deb, this has been awesome. Seriously, thank you so much. I know that I am antsy now to go out and do some of these things. You know, because it's funny. So I actually did one of the things that you said not to do. I'll admit it. I'll own it. I always try to keep transparency with my audience. So when you saw me do live composite for the first time in Chicago, that was the first time I had ever tried live composite. I read the manual before I left for Chicago. I knew that Mike Baining, our Olympus visionary, had done this picture. I was like, I've got to go try that. So literally, that's why I was shooting so many that night. It's like, okay, let me figure out what this is going to do. So yes, I broke that rule, and it would have made a lot more sense if I would have spent some time with it in advance. But it was a fun learning, you know, like since I wasn't the one that was teaching, you were. It was, you know, it was fun to kind of just tag along and play with it and that. So, but it is. I mean, it's a great point. I do struggle getting people to understand that value of practice. I tell this story frequently since I'm old enough that I was around in the film days, and I was around with my first Nikon camera. There was no autofocus. The zoom lenses were horrible in general. In fact, Nikon wasn't making zooms yet, so everything was primes. And I was in junior high school. I would come home from school and I would bulk load a roll of 36 exposure film, and I would go down to the corner of my street where there was a busier street, and I would sit for about 10 or 15 minutes. This was right after I got my first motor drive, so I was really excited to start shooting sports. The longest lens I had was a fixed focal length 200 millimeter, and I would do follow focus of cars coming up and down the street and practice for about half an hour, and then randomly pick a point where it's like, okay, next car, I'm shooting. So I had the 36 exposure roll of film in, and as the next car would come around a corner, my task was to shoot the entire 36 exposure roll of film as it came at me and past me, with the goal to be keeping the front right quarter panel, or the front edge of the bumper, because this was back when every car had a chrome bumper, to keep it in focus as it went past. And I was enough of a nerd. I would run home. I had a darkroom. I had a clipboard with a chart hanging on the clipboard. I developed the roll of film. I never printed them. It was all to see if I could keep them in focus. But I would track how many frames out of the 36 I had sharp focus on that bumper. And that's how I could tell if I was getting better at what I was doing.
For you, that's
so
super
from early on, I mean, yes, the practice thing it cannot be stressed enough. It really can't. And even in lieu of practice, just the fact of pick up the camera and go shoot and take pictures. So believe me, I'm so thrilled to hear that. But I really, really appreciate you sharing so much information. I know that as an educator, because I've seen you do that, but it's really tough sometimes in interviews and even online to get people to really open up and talk about that stuff. So thank you so much. I will look forward to crossing paths with you again. Hopefully, you're not doing Shutterfest this year, are you? Are you at Shutterfest?
No, I haven't been to Shutterfest.
Okay, this is actually my first time too. So, but hopefully we will cross paths again. Okay, but again, I thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you for having me.
And gang, you know the drill. We've been here for so we're over 90 minutes. We're at 91 minutes. So 182 minutes, or don't come back next week. I appreciate you being here. I know you enjoy it. I enjoy having you, but you got to go out and pick up that camera. So whatever you do, gang, please have a great week. Go take some pictures, and remember these.
Thanks for watching another live episode of TogChat. Now, pick up that camera and shoot something, because your best shot is your next shot. So keep learning, keep thinking, and keep shooting. Adios.